Cesare should never have become a general. He was the second son of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia. His mother was Rodrigo's longtime mistress, Anazza de Catanei. Originally, it was publicly communicated that Vanozza's husband Domenico was Cesare's father. This was to spare him the disgrace of a bastard. However, a secret papal document confirmed that he was indeed Rodrigo's child. Cesare had an older half-brother, Pedro Luis. He had a different mother. As was customary, Pedro Luis was to make a career in the secular field. Cesare was destined for a clerical career. When Pedro Luis died in 1488, the secular career passed to Cesare's younger brother Juan. He had another brother, Joffre, and a sister, Lucrezia. Due to the mysteries surrounding his origins, not even Cesare's date of birth is known. He was born either on September 13th, 1475, or in April 1476. His family was originally from Valencia in Spain. However, Rodrigo had to come to Rome decades earlier with his uncle, who was to become Pope Calixtus III. Cesare was therefore born in Italy, possibly directly in Rome. But he hadn't forgotten his Spanish origins. He usually used the Spanish version of his first name. Letters written by him, which have been preserved, testify to this. Cesare was also active as a bullfighter, possibly even directly in St. Peter's Square. His goal was to be able to decapitate the animal with just one blow. He never had a real inclination for the ecclesiastical field, but already at the age of 6 or 7 he became a papal pro-notary and got a job as a canon in the Cathedral of Valencia. It was here that he later became a bishop and then an archbishop, although he was never ordained a priest in his entire life. His archbishopric in Valencia earned Cesare his nickname Valentino, which quickly spread due to his numerous romantic adventures, as he seemed strongly reminiscent of Saint Valentine. In particular, his elevation to the bishopric in 1491 caused great resistance in Spain because of his lack of priestly ordination, but this resistance was in vain. As much as Cesare loathed his work as a cleric, so much he enjoyed his education. It was here that his intelligence became evident at a very early age. In 1489, he began studying law at the University of Perugia. In 1491, he moved to the University of Pisa. His teachers attested to the fact that he was able to discuss on the same level as doctoral students, and he was only in his first semesters. His surviving letters also give a good impression of his intelligence. During his studies, he probably also fathered the first of his at least 11 illegitimate children. Cesare was not present at the event that was decisive for his future path. His father was crowned Pope on August 11, 1492. Rodrigo's illegitimate children were not in Rome to keep up appearances, but were recalled soon after. At that time, Cesare enjoyed his secular life above all, as we can see from this report of an envoy from March 1493. I met Cesare the day before yesterday at home in Trastevere. He was going hunting in a very worldly outfit, i.e. in silk and armed only with the simple cleric of tonsure. While riding with him, I talked to him for a while. My acquaintance with him is very familiar. He is of great and excellent genius and of noble nature. He displays the manner of a great prince's son. It was particularly happy and cheerful, wholly festive. With his great modesty, he makes a much better and more distinguished appearance than his brother, the Duke of Gandia. He is also well talented. The Archbishop never had any inclination towards the ecclesiastical state, but his benefices earned him more than 16,000 ducats. His lack of inclination towards clericalism did not prevent his father from allowing him to rise further. He was made a cardinal on September 23rd, 1493. At that time, Alexander also recognized him as his son in a secret bull, but Vanozza and her husband were again publicly named as parents, as illegitimate children were not allowed to hold church offices. In the College of Cardinals, Cesare's elevation was met with extreme resistance, but again it was futile. The future Pope Julius II even refused to participate in the investiture, in which he was supposed to play a ceremonial role. However, such actions could not prevent the process. The same was true of the other Borgias who were called to Rome from Spain in the coming years to become cardinals themselves. However, Cesare's cardinalate began in a very dramatic way. The French King Charles VIII was in Italy at the time to become King of Naples. He was an enemy of the Pope who wanted to see his son Juan on the throne. In addition, he was too close to the Spanish crown for the French liking. Charles occupied Rome and only withdrew after Alexander had not only assured him of his friendship, but also provided a hostage, Cesare. But it only took him 2 days to escape. Shortly afterwards, it also turned out that he had fooled the king in another way as well. The chests that the Pope had given to the French king did not contain the gold promised by Alexander. Cesare had it exchanged for stones and earth. His reputation for being particularly cunning was now emerging. However, he also remained sexually active. Around this time, Cesare became more and more ill with syphilis, which eventually left clear scars on his face. In Cesare's last years, he wore a leather mask that covered half of his face to cover up these marks at least a little. In the years that followed, Cesare undertook various missions for his father. His path also led him to Florence, where he met Leonardo da Vinci and Niccolo Machiavelli. Both men were fascinated by Borgia. The former later entered Cesare's service for about 2 years. Machiavelli dedicated his well-known work, The Prince, to him and described him as a model for every prince who wants to secure his power. The extent to which Cesare was involved in the elimination of the rule of the monk Savonarola in Florence is disputed. In the well-known Borgia television series, he is granted the key role. The sources, however, speak a different language. They show that the Pope was clearly pulling the strings in the background. But the Pope was not in Florence. It was Cesare who was probably there. We are not even completely sure about that. Anyway, for Cesare, the year 1497 was much more important. His brother Juan was murdered. A robbery murder was ruled out as the corpse still had a large sum of money with it. Since the list of Juan's enemies was long, so were those of the suspects. Cesare, distorted after a secular career, took a place very high on it. Even in modern times, the German historian Ferdinand Gregorovius accepted his guilt and said that he had a, quote, satanic influence over the Pope who knew of his son's guilt but did nothing. Even during his lifetime, Cesare was confronted with this accusation and again. It reached as far as Spain. Juan's widow, Maria Enriquez, remained convinced until the time of her death that it was Cesare. The bitter truth is that we are not a step further in this regard. The sources do not allow for a clear conclusion. Maybe it was Cesare, or maybe it wasn't it. A few days later, Cesare was sent to Naples as a papal deputy, where he was to perform the coronation of Frederick of Aragon. This had been planned for a long time. Originally, Juan was supposed to accompany him. It was by no means the case that the Pope sent him away from Rome as a precaution or out of anger. However, he was not to stay in Naples for long. In 1498, he returned to Rome and asked his father for what he had wanted all his life: dismissal from the College of Cardinals and permission for a secular career. In doing so, he allegedly argued that from early childhood he had always been wholeheartedly inclined to the worldly state, but his father had wanted him to devote himself to the spiritual state, and that he had believed that he could not oppose his will. But since his thoughts and aspirations and inclinations were directed towards the worldly life, he begged His Holiness, our Lord, to condescend with special indulgence to grant him a dispensation, so that, having laid aside his spiritual dignity and vestments, he might be permitted to return to the worldly state and enter into marriage. He now asks the reverend cardinals to willingly give their consent to such a dispensation. As hinted in the last sentence, Alexander would only agree if the other cardinals did the same. Officially, the church used the fact that Cesare was not ordained a priest to justify this step. His cardinalate was therefore understood as a secular administrative office in the Papal States, which only served to elect a pope, and he could well be dismissed from this secular office. Cesare traveled to France just 6 weeks later as the new papal legate, and an important and difficult task awaited him here. The new king, Louis XII, wanted a divorce from his childless marriage to his wife Jeanne in order to be able to marry Anne of Brittany, the widow of Charles VIII. The papal legate achieved this quickly. In return, Louis made him Duke of Valentinois, declared him commander of his troops, and placed under his direct command an army of 400 men, paid for by the crown. He was also looking for a worthy wife for Borgia. Cesare was able to choose from several candidates and decided to go with Charlotte. He's said to have consummated the marriage 8 times on their wedding night. However, one single source reports that the court physician was angry with Cesare. He had therefore exchanged the medication that ensured the erection with laxatives, with the corresponding consequences. It's not likely true, but I thought it's funny, so I told the story. Cesare spent a few weeks with his new wife. This was enough to impregnate her. Charlotte gave birth to their daughter Louise 9 months later. She was to be Cesare's only legitimate child. However, the couple's descendants are still alive today. Cesare, however, was never to meet his child and never see his wife again. In 1499, he led an army across the Alps to enforce France's supposed rights over Milan, in which he succeeded. Louis, however, forbade Charlotte and the child to leave France. They were far too valuable as his hostages. Cesare, who had taken Milan without a fight, remained in Italy. He received his own army of 400 lancers, or 1,600 men from Louis, in order to establish his own feudal lordship in the Romagna. This present came with conditions. He must not jeopardize the alliance between France and Venice and must not otherwise counteract French interests. Cesare was now also officially elevated to papal general and entrusted with the task of restoring the integrity of the Papal States. He rushed from victory to victory. As early as 1500, for example, Imola and Forlì were captured. Shortly thereafter, Cesare won Faenza. He had actually promised free passage to the previous rulers Astorre and Ottaviano Manfredi, but had them murdered anyway. There were only setbacks in relation to Bologna and Florence. Cesare could not or was not allowed to take over the metropolises. Nevertheless, he managed to expropriate practically all the influential families in the Papal States for his father. Only the Orsini were able to save themselves by an agreement. In 1501, Cesare was therefore made hereditary Duke of the Romagna by the Pope. The secularization of the Papal States had thus begun, which did not interest Alexander or his son. In 1502, however, the critical year dawned. Louis returned to Italy and demanded Cesare's allegiance several times. The French king wanted to appropriate Tuscany with the main prize, Florence. But the Pope and his general also had their eyes on that. The enterprising Machiavelli, who represented the government of Florence at the time, managed to make Louis develop doubts about Cesare's fidelity. The latter, for this part, did much to enlarge these doubts because he marched with his troops again and again through Florentine territory, even so he was not allowed to. The long list of enemies of the Borgia was thus enriched by prominent names. Louis threatened to deprive Cesare of his 400 lances. He also sent auxiliary troops to Florence. The papal general could no longer avoid his visit to his actual liege lord. On August 5th, 1502, they met in Milan. An envoy describes the very surprising course of events. The most Christian king greeted and embraced him with great joy and led him to the castle, where he placed him in the chamber closest to his own, and he himself gave instructions for supper and selected various dishes, and that evening he went 3 or 4 times, when it was time to go to bed, to Cesare in his shirt sleeves in his room. And yesterday he ordered him to put on his own shirts, undergarments and garments, for Duke Valentino had brought no baggage carts, only horses. In short, he could not have done more for his son or brother. Yeah, that was all nice and everything, but there was another conversation as well. It was made clear to Cesare that he had to stay away from Florence and Tuscany as a whole. Then everything would be fine. The papal general officially accepted these conditions. In his command staff, however, there were quite a few men who nevertheless wanted to invade Tuscany. Overall, there were rumblings in the leadership of Cesare's army. Some of his commanders had secretly conspired with local rulers against the Borgia. What followed was a process that would go down in history as a marvelous deception. On December 31st, 1502, Cesare invited his condottieri, these are his generals, to a feast of reconciliation. All would be forgiven and forgotten. The men came, but were arrested and murdered. It became apparent that Cesare was in an increasingly difficult situation since the conflict with Louis. The French king had shown him the limits, and he no longer held his protective hand over him. All the enemies sensed that there was blood in the water. And in 1503, things were to get even worse. Cesare and his father fell seriously ill at the same time. The rumors ranged from a poison attack to malaria. While Cesare survived, the Pope was able to recover for a short time, but then passed away. The Borgia family was so overwhelmed by the situation that they first barricaded themselves in the Vatican and only vacated it after lengthy negotiations. The papal election was to take place without the presence of the family of the previous head of the church. For a short time, however, it looked as if the tide would turn in Cesare's favor once again. The new Pope, Pius III, allowed him to return to Rome and confirmed him in his offices. However, he reigned only for 26 days. For the new election, Giuliano della Rovere approached Cesare. Borgia controlled the 12 Spanish cardinal votes. Della Rovere offered him a deal similar to the one he had made with Pius. The 12 cardinals should vote for him. In return, Cesare would retain his offices and titles. Machiavelli described it as the first great mistake of the papal general to have accepted this offer. Della Rovere won the election, became Pope Julius II, and in principle immediately turned against Cesare. He was able to flee to Ostia, but was then captured and imprisoned. Cesare had to give up all the castles he ruled and lost everything else as well. He therefore fled to Naples in 1504, where he thought he was with an ally. But in the meantime, the Spaniards ruled here. Under pressure from the Spanish crown, Cesare was captured, tortured, and finally transferred to Spain. It was a gift from the Spanish royal couple to the Pope in the hope that Julius II would agree to allow the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon to marry the heir to the English throne, Henry, even though she had previously been married to his brother Arthur. Well, as we know, this calculation worked out. Cesare lived in solitary confinement in Spain for over a year in Chinchilla Castle and was then transferred to La Mota Castle. Here in 1506 he managed to escape with the Silk Cord. Cesare was able to make his way to his wife's family in Navarro. His brother-in-law was king here and immediately employed him as his general. However, the end was to come. On March 11, 1507, Cesare was killed during the siege of the fortress of Viana. He is said to have been extremely bored by the siege. During a heavy storm, he watched as an enemy party left the fortress, seemingly helpless. Cesare, bored, decided to go after the man himself. It could have been a trap, he knew that, and it was an ambush. In the nearby forest, he was suddenly alone and surrounded. The enemies quickly brought it to an end, stripped Cesare naked, and then paraded him around in triumph. Cesare was originally buried in the church of Santa Maria in Viana. His tombstone said, "Here rests in Leth earth one who was feared by all, who held war and peace in his hands." Cesare, however, was exhumed again and buried outside the church to be trampled on, quote, by men and animals because of his sins. It was not until 2007 that he was back in the church. His sword has found its way all the way to the British Museum. After his death, opinions about Cesare were strongly divided. Some considered him an angel, others the devil. The papal master of ceremonies Borgia spoke of a completely satanic character of the means which Borgia had used. The inhabitants of the Romagna, on the other hand, praised Cesare long after his deposition and remained loyal to him. In the 19th century, a strong romanticization of Cesare began, which from the second half of the 20th century turned completely reversed. In 2011, for example, Cesare received a rating from German historians as an unscrupulous criminal. I can't say for sure what is true. The numerous rumors that have arisen about Cesare and his family are to blame. Cesare's actual mother, for example, is said to have died at an early age because Rodrigo Borgia had consecrated his first son to the devil in order to become pope. This accusation was widely circulated, even though Cesare was not even his first son. Burkhardt reported that Cesare had helped his sister Lucrezia organize orgies in the Vatican. He recorded such an event for the year 1501. All Borgia were said to have incestuous relationships. Alexander VI, for example, is said to have enforced the divorce of his daughter Lucrezia with the accusation of her husband's impotence because he wanted her for himself. Alexander is also said to have been afraid of Cesare himself, or to have been the actual mastermind behind it all. Cesare was therefore only his mere vicarious agent. The rumors were gratefully taken up by the enemies of the Borgia, and it is easy to think that they also brought them into the world. It is no longer possible to determine what is true and what is deliberate defamation. Personally, I think Cesare would have liked that the people don't know what to think of him. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe because it really helps a lot. Bye!